Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name's Treive Nicholas, and I'm delighted to be here to interview today Dawn Denton, who many of you may know. In fact, it's normally Dawn that's doing the interviewing herself, so we've decided to turn the tables, haven't we, Dawn?
Yep.
How does it feel to be on the other side of the table?
I don't know. And actually, it's really good for me because I get a feeling for what people feel like when they're being interviewed. So it's really good.
We're going to go easy on you, Dawn, so you're all right. Dawn is quite a prolific publisher herself, and she's written a book in 2001 called A Walking Tour Guiding. And we're going to talk about that and various aspects of publishing and what Dawn does. So stay with us. But I really want to start about you, Dawn. We've interacted for maybe 18 months or so, either face to face or online. And you're a woman that comes across with huge amounts of energy, if I may say, and enthusiasm. Well, where do you get that from? Because it's a great feature.
I don't know. I suppose growing up with a mother who was a community health nurse, so her life was about service to others. And I sometimes wonder if that's a learned behavior, watching her. I don't know. I've just and possibly being an only child, where I had to find my community as opposed to having brothers and sisters at home, and I know not all brothers and sisters get on, but you're there, you're always there. You have meals together, you watch each other grow, you go through some of your life's milestones. But when you're an only child, I think you find your community outside of the family home, maybe.
And one of the things I read in the book or something about you, it says you describe yourself as a multi-potentialite. Now, I love it. You've put two words together. Tell me what that means in your thinking.
So there's actually a TED talk about it. It's a multi-potentialite and living a life where you don't there's no one true path for you. So,
Okay.
some people, and this has been a frustration all my life, when we were 16 and people were preparing for what they were going to be doing with the rest of their lives. I had friends that wanted to be a teacher. They ended up being a teacher and they retired. They will retire as a teacher. And I was really jealous of that because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I've kind of gone from one thing to another. And in the old days, that was an awful thing to do. You don't jump around on a CV. You've got to show that you're consistent and you've got, you can stick with things. But actually, I think the world has grown into me, if you like, because now it's quite acceptable and quite a good thing to have a range of different activities or skill sets which you can transfer into all sorts of different environments. To be honest, I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but
Do you know, I suspect what you've said will actually resonate with many of the viewers today. You're absolutely right. We all remember friends that were going to be dentists and they went off and went to dentist, or someone was going to be an X or a Y. And the world is a little more fragmented, and I think it appreciates and values people bringing multiple different skills to new facets of life. So thanks for that. You've also sort of caveated with that. I've seen you call yourself an author-entrepreneur. Sort of I think that's concatenating author and entrepreneur. Is that a fair comment?
yeah, I think nowadays writing a book, there's so many reasons why you would write a book. It could be a passion project, so you've written passion project books. It could be to reach new people in your business, so it's a form of marketing. People buy your book and they get a flavor for what you do, then they might buy additional services. And also, I know people whose services are so expensive that not everyone can access them. But if you write a book, it's more affordable for people to access what you have to share with the world. So there's many reasons that people would write a book. But I think that writing a book and then selling it is like having a business. And it's about being an entrepreneur, considering how you're going to get money in, how you're going to market, being creative in how you're going to reach more people. And if that is your purpose, is to write a book and sell it to make the money to pay your bills, then you need to think like an entrepreneur.
It's funny you should say that because as you know, I've published them, and anyone who asks me, I say, do you watch Dragon's Den? And they said, if you do, that's possibly, unfortunately, how you have to think about a book. You might have the world's best book, you may not. You might have just an average book, but can you actually pitch it to a market and demonstrate that if people are going to invest in it, or you're going to invest in it, are you going to get some sort of return? And it's not as glamorous as talking about the adjectives or the verbs or describing the story you're about to tell, but what you're saying rings true with me a great deal. You've got to look at the whole picture if you're going to publish the writing and the sort of slightly business end of things.
Yeah, and Robert Kiyosaki always talks about, he met a young girl who was a writer, and she said, oh, I want to be a writer like you. And he said, oh, well, you need to learn how to do marketing. And she said, no, I'm a writer. And he said, well, does it say best writing author on the front of a book? No, it says best selling author. And she was really disappointed. She was like, oh, I'm just going to write it and they will come. You know, people will just buy the book.
I've also, it'd be fair to say that your bio somewhere, it says that you love travel, you like cheese, but hate onions. Do you want to just talk us through that combination of personal characteristics?
So I never liked onions as a child. I don't know, again, if that's got to do with, you know, what your parents cook in the home. You know, like if you don't get access to some things, like my mother didn't like spinach, so I grew up not eating spinach, but I've learned to like it as an adult. But I think my mother always thought I'd outgrow the onion thing. I don't like them. I never have. I can taste when someone's used the knife to cut the onion and then they cut the tomato.
Oh, really? Oh, crikey. You wouldn't survive long in my household, I can tell you. It's the first
But I
thing.
love garlic, so it's an onion family, but it's a different flavor. And then cheese. I just love cheese. I think there's only one cheese or two cheeses I've ever tasted that I didn't like. One tasted like smelly feet, you know. It was an Italian cheese. It was awful. But I do like all types of cheese. And I live in Somerset, which is the cheese county, really.
So, and your love of travel, because you're originally from South Africa, and you've done a job, I found out, acting as a tour guide or guide. So, how did the love of travel come about?
And when I came to the UK on a 2-year work visa 28 years ago now, a long time ago, I my intention was to earn pounds and then go back to South Africa. And I was teaching and supply teaching in Southeast London, which was horrendous. I hated it. I mean, I was locked in rooms. I was hit over the head with a cricket bat. I mean, it was the most awful experience. And I saw an advert in a local paper that said, do you like to travel? And I thought, oh, well, if I have the opportunity, I probably would love it. I'd been to the States as a teenager, and I'd been to the UK, and that was the only travel I'd ever done, really. I mean, I've been to Zimbabwe and Botswana briefly when I was growing up. So I applied to be to go on it was about an 6 to 8 week training program with Contiki Travel. And we went out to Europe and we learned everything there is to learn about towns, cities, where to change money, because in those days you changed money, and all the excursions. And yeah, I loved the training. It was a real challenge. I felt it was like being in the army, really. We were up at silly o'clock in the morning and we were camping in February in Vienna, 2 inches of snow. It was such a lovely experience. And, those experiences pull people together quite quickly. So the people I trained with are still very much a part of my life. Yeah, I just fell into travel unexpectedly. And it just became a part of who I am, and has crafted the last almost 30 years of my life.
Well, that love, that the pain and the joy that you've got from travel and guiding, it certainly comes through with your book, Walking Tour Guiding the Ultimate Handbook. So you must still feel very passionate about it today, to be able to write a book.
Yeah, I am actually had not been guiding for about 3 years. I decided to stay home and finish my my second degree correspondence. So I had finished that and I thought, oh, I should go back to guiding. And I had an interview on Zoom, even pre-pandemic. Wow, like, did Zoom exist? And I sat there already, my very first interview on Zoom. I thought it was very modern world. Wow. And I waited and waited and waited, and the person never showed up. It was for a company in the Midlands somewhere who sent groups around the world. And I emailed her. I mean, how long do you sit on Zoom and wait? So I emailed her after about half an hour and I said, oh, something must have come up. And that was the day that the US borders were closed for the pandemic. And she said, we're not hiring until we know what's happening. And then the next thing, I got an email saying, we're not hiring at all. So, don't bother applying because we don't know what the future looks like. So that was a real, like I was just had my heart set on going back into guiding. And then, of course, with the pandemic, I thought, well, I've got all these notes that I've taken over the years when I trained in Europe, but also when I trained as a London city guide in the early 2000s. And I thought, let me just start putting that stuff together. I hate having all this content on my laptop that just actually does nothing. It just exists. So I started putting that all together, and that became my lockdown book.
You've done obviously made an impression, because I've got a quote here from Willem van der Veld, who says this book needs translating into 30 languages. So somebody in the trade seems to think you've sort of hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think for me, I do some fictional writing. I mean, I don't think that's my skill. And although we're all creative, but it takes a very different craft. And I have a very structured and orderly brain. So I looked at the content and thought, well, how would somebody learn to be a guide? Now, in some parts of the world, you can't be a guide without, there's loads of restrictions. So you have to have a degree in archaeology or history or anthropology, and only then can you apply to be a guide. So in Italy and in Spain. This would be for people not in those countries, but possibly where they might want to just spend some time in their local community. Maybe that, in every village, there's somebody who seems to know the history of the village. They've always been there a long time, or they've come into the village and learnt everything there is to know. And I just think it would be really lovely if those people could become village hosts, where they could, people ring them up from the local pub, or, there's a notice in the church that says, if you are passing through, give, Dawn a call, and she'll pop out for half an hour and give you, some information about the village that you're visiting, because we do pass through villages, when we're traveling. So I just think that would be a really nice way to do it. So it, for me, was about not using jargon, not being industry focused, but just for the man on the street who just wants to learn something new, and maybe they're retiring, or although that is another frustration. I really get frustrated that history seems to belong to the older generation. Children love it. When they're children, they dress up as knights and they're so excited. And then they just lose it until they get to their, 60s. Where does it go?
That's a quite good point. I live in Winchester, which is a nice city. And whenever I go into the cathedral with friends, I try and big it up, saying, imagine horses riding through the cathedral, or can you imagine Charles II sneaking his mistress through this door? So I try and make it a little interesting. Dawn, what would you say to anyone that's listening that's had a sort of an idea about writing a book, or has got an expertise in something, and they're sort of twiddling their thumbs and, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next year? What would you say to anybody, and how they might go about things?
So I think the biggest barriers really to writing a book is people go, I don't have the time, and it's going to be expensive. And I think it's easy to overcome those. If you spend half an hour every 3 days, or even just on a weekend, if you say, okay, I'm going to give myself half an hour, this is for me, I'm going to sit down and do that. Actually, over time, the content will start growing, and you'll start feeling that it's becoming a book. Of course, it doesn't need to be thousands and thousands and thousands of words. A book can be anything from, I would even say, 5,000 words. It can be a little handbook, a small little thing that people stick in their bag. And actually, if you publish on Amazon, it's completely free. You don't have to spend a penny. So I think you can, if you want to. You can then get your editors in, you can get book designers in, you can, do all of that. And there's great organizations out there that will help you. But ultimately, the time is the big thing. And also, I think people are overwhelmed sometimes with what they know. and they want to put everything they know into one book. And actually, it's like doing a public speaking talk. Like if you want to do a TED talk, you just take one topic, one idea, and then expand that. And the other stuff can be other books. Because once people write one book, as you know, Treive, once you write one book, you've got the next one lined up and the next one. So it's just about getting started. I think the most difficult thing of writing is opening a Word document and looking at a blank page.
That's a very it's just such an interesting thing you said. I remember to this day the first words of the first book I wrote. It was a huge moment, lifting the laptop open and writing chapter 1 and writing the first paragraph. And I'm not sure the first paragraph survived, but it's like that every great journey starts with the first step. I've started the first step, and it was also a great weight off my shoulders in that, well, I've started. It's not perfect, but it's better than I had half an hour ago. Half an hour, I had an empty spreadsheet, empty Word document. Now I've got some words on it. Are they the best words? No, they're not. Just, I think there's also a quote from Hemingway that used to say that the first draft isn't supposed to be very good. I'm paraphrasing him, but I think we can all relate to that. But at least you've got something on paper, haven't you?
And an editor can't work with anything until there's something there. So you have to put something down, and it is very hard. And also the whole concept of I'm not a writer. And yet we write emails, we write social media posts, we write reports for work, we write all the time. And that is the biggest barrier for identifying as a writer, is that you are a writer. You don't have to be J.K. Rowling. You don't have to be, I don't know, Stephen Hawking and publishing these science books. You can just be Dawn Denton and actually be brave. Go to your social media profiles and just go writer and see how that makes you feel.
And let's not forget, J.K. Rowling was a young woman in a coffee bar in Scotland with a baby, and she was not J.K. Rowling writer. She was J.K. Rowling woman in a bit of a spot of difficulty, trying to find a way out of a very difficult situation. So that sort of resonates, doesn't it? And also, you've mentioned you yourself have written, I think, 5 other books. So I think that's an example where you've taken the different topics and broken them down and published for different topics.
Yeah, and I think that's just come over the years when people have said, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do you do Instagram? And then I've been on loads of Instagram courses. I've tested loads of things. And I think, well, I'm just going to put it down on a Word document, save it as a PDF and stick it on Amazon. I know it sounds really easy, but that is how easy it is if you have knowledge, experience, and passion for something. I sometimes think people are very good at, well, we're all good at something. So even if growing roses is your thing, there are people like me that would love to learn more about roses. And, even if you have to research part of your roses journey, then you can still be the one who does that and put something out there into the world. And people will love it because we want to learn from others. And that's a good way to learn.
You said something very poignant in your guiding book, which is you don't have to be the world expert to be a guide. And you don't have to be the world expert on roses to write a book about roses. I think that's something I've learned. As long as you've got a knowledge and you've got a capability, people accept your own fallibilities. You're not the definitive expert. In fact, I think people are slightly suspicious of people who claim to be the definitive expert. But perhaps you're just providing a helping hand, people on the journey that you've been on, and you're helping people to get better.
I also find that people who are real experts and real specialists often aren't the best guides, because they want to tell everything they know about that piece of architecture. And the general public just want to know that building, the king came and snuck his mistress in through the back door, and it was built with stone from Croatia. That's interesting because they go, oh, wow, I've been to that island in Croatia, or whatever it is. So I think being too much of an expert can often be a barrier to being a good guide, because then people often find themselves going into lecture mode. If they're a lecturer of, I don't know, anthropology, they find themselves starting to almost vomit out everything they know And it's really hard to pull back and make that just interesting just for the general public and not from an expert.
What's been some of your favorite places to be a guide, where you could really express yourself and get that balance between information and being Dawn, the host and guide?
That's an interesting one. I really like guiding in the City of London. Like, I just think the Square Mile is fascinating. And because so many people go through the Square Mile to work, come out the tube, heads down, and they just walk. And when you start pointing out some of the lovely stories, you know, one of my was lovely. One day I stopped outside Mary Le Beau, the church that had that rings the bells. And Dick Whittington heard the bells when he was leaving London, and he got to Hampstead, and he was on the hill in Hampstead, and he heard the Bow Bells. The problem is that you can't hear the Bow Bells from Hampstead in reality. But I was telling the story, and a little old lady came and stood behind my group, and she listened for a while. And then, of course, I spoke about how if you're born within the radius of hearing the Bow Bells, you are a Londoner, or specifically an East Londoner. And she went, oh, I'm an East Londoner. I was born and raised, and my family could hear the bells of the Bow Bells. And so she started sharing about her experiences and growing up in East London. And I was just, that for me brought the buildings to life, because it gave a human story behind it. And then I think other places like in Spain, some of those smaller little villages, you know, like Toledo or Cordoba, you know, they're so windy that you know, I mean, I used to put my group into dinner and then go and double check the route, because I didn't want to get lost. And those little places are so, you know, windy. But that's when it feels more real. You know, when people they can hear people walking around them, they're going through little alleyways and almost opportunity to look inside windows. I'm not advocating go around and look in people's windows, but it just makes it more human, really.
Funny, Dawn, I used to live in Madrid for 15 months, and I used to walk to work in the city of Madrid every day, just so I could walk through the cobbled streets. I could have taken the tube or a taxi, but I insisted on taking on the walk, and that's for that very reason. Every day there would be a something different going on, and bumping into real people doing real jobs, and it makes the city very alive, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I trained with somebody who worked in the city for 35 years in London, and he had never looked up. You know, he just walked past these beautiful buildings, modern and old, and in the city as well, you've got this amalgamation of modern and old, a bit like the IMP structure at the Louvre in Paris. You know, that glass triangle, very controversial at the time, but gave it a new generation of architecture. You know, and I think we do that very well in the City of London as well, across this country, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any places that you haven't been that you'd really like to go?
Yeah, I haven't done Scandinavia. I'd love to go to Scandinavia. And part of the reason was when I was guiding originally, I had a South African passport, and it was more difficult to get visas for Scandinavia at the time. But on a British passport, there's no excuse now. I think maybe Canada I haven't been to, and I'd like to go there.
Lovely
Yeah, I
people.
think
Very, very, very warm, easy to get on with, and quite relaxed. And you've got the contrast between the East Coast and the West Coast.
yeah, and I love the seasons in parts of Canada, you know, and also that part of northeast United States, you know, very clear seasons where it snows and then it's 35 degrees. Do you know that I love that contrast in the seasons, which I think you get in a lot of parts of that, well, Canada, and then into the, you know, the US.
Dawn, I just want to sort of bring this to a close, and with a couple of your favourite phrases, which I've heard you mentioned about, you know, your Southern African roots, about the importance of Ubuntu, and your other phrase about takes a village to raise a child. Talk us through about how they are a part of the sort of fabric of how you lead life.
I'm very much about community. That's a really important value for me. And again, I don't know if that's learned behavior, if that's a personality thing in my DNA. So the concept of Ubuntu, I exist because the community is there, and the community exists because of me. So, we all make up collectives as individuals. And I love that whole concept that we all come together to support each other, but also to make things happen in communities. I also, the whole village to raise a child, I think times have changed, and I think that it's a real shame that we aren't, and that's partly because we've moved around the world and people have immigrated and are doing different things. But I didn't have the luxury of grandparents, and I wonder if the cultures that still value the different generations living together. I know for many that you'd kill your parents and your grandparents if they were in the same house with your children. But I do think that there's something about that everybody needs to have a hand in the raising of the child. There's different aspects, that we can bring to a child's life. And I think it's the same for business. It's the same for everything. We cannot exist as individuals. We have to use the community, and part of the community is supporting each other. And whatever you craft, you create, you write, part of that process is including others in that. So it's the same as me and you talking here. This is part of the village of raising the child, of getting the book out there, talking about it, maybe inspiring other people to do the same thing. So yeah, those two concepts really drive me. Yeah.
So if they're driving you, where are you going next, Dawn? You're not a woman to sit down and twiddle your thumbs. I know that. And anywhere, any clue about what's next on the horizon, either publishing or business wise?
Yes, I'm currently looking at, I'm writing a customer service book, so really similar to my walking tour guiding, but because I worked in customer service and I've taught customer service at A level and in the tourism industry. So I thought it would be really nice to take all those resources and plonk them in a book. So I'm busy working on that. I was hoping to get that done by the end of the year, but I don't know. So I'll have to look at that. And then I don't know. Then I have to start going through my folders on my computer and seeing what needs to be sorted and put into a book.
Well, Dawn, look, thank you very much for your time today. I find you an absolute inspiration. Your energy, your enthusiasm, your can-do approach, I personally find an inspiration. And I hope that some of your stories about how you wrote the books and how you've gone about it and why you've done it is perhaps a bit of an innovation to some of the people that are watching and listening today. So,
thank you, Treive. It's really nice to chat from the other side of the table.
Well, it's about time. You've been good enough to put up and lay a platform for everybody else to talk about themselves. So it's nice to hear about you and what you've done and how you go about things.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dawn. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.